The How does the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 factor into Trump's vision for a second term? Hasn't he publicly denounced it? What would a successful dismantling of the state look like under Trump, and how would this harm the working class? You write, quote, Trump's, or one of you write, quote, Trump's agenda will likely overlap with efforts to radically reduce the scope of government services targeting social safety nets like Medicare and Social Security.
So one thing that's useful to start with is just to distinguish the deep state versus the state versus another term that you see quite often from people like J.D. Vance and Steve Bannon, the administrative state.
Okay.
So the deep state as a concept actually comes from Turkey. We miss Eugene. And it describes the security services and the career officials that staff the places where intelligence is gathered, decisions on the use of force are made, and programs of law enforcement, military violence, judicial repression are executed. And this is one of the few areas where you actually don't have a lot of privatization and contracting. You do have some, but it's generally the same people year in and year out. They aren't really suited for a lot of private sector jobs, and they know where all the bodies are buried. And that deep knowledge of the sinews of the secret flow of power within the state are extremely valuable. So those guys stick around, and those guys can do a lot without any authorization. Often their activities are officially shielded by classified status or other types of government secrecy regulations. They can usually tap into financial resources with little or no questions asked. They're very difficult to audit, and a lot of people are frightened of them or owe them favors. So that's the deep state. More broad than that is the category of the administrative state. The deep state is what Trump originally accused of undermining his power. And when you see things like the letter of dozens of former intelligence agency, analysts and leaders signed declaring Trump as unfit to govern, well, these people kind of are out for him. He's not wrong. And it's funny seeing them treated as bureaucrats like the administrator of NASA on TV, because these are mostly men, but they're figures that ordered assassinations, that have secret files on everyone, that know all of the government secret programs and things that they shouldn't be doing back to front. So there's a lot of power concentrated in these hands, a lot of unaccountable power. And they have relationships with the agencies that are supposed to oversee them, which can sometimes be a little incestuous and sometimes be a little collusive, right? When was the last time that you had a serious investigation of the intelligence agencies? After the Church Commission. And it's basically to the extent that you have any type of oversight, it generally is a whitewash and the substantiation of the impunity of these groups. The administrative state, which becomes the actual target of figures like Bannon and the Heritage Foundation, is not just the security guys, but like the FDA, the USDA, the Department of Education. Any of these public agencies that are supposed to govern and structure segments of the economy or parts of American public life. And the reason is simple. While the relationship that conservative groups have with the deep state is actually very ambiguous, a lot of them are friends. A lot of them are MAGA people at this point. There's if you think about someone like Dick Cheney, a consummate creature of the deep state, right? He's a Republican leader who has very, very deep connections and sympathies with the apparatus. That's true of the deep state, but the administrative state, well, every Republican hates the Department of Energy. Every Republican hates the Department of Education. Every Republican hates the regulatory powers of the Department of Transportation or an organization like the EPA. And by trying to link these two, because these agencies also have career bureaucrats, they also have civil servants with pensions and decent benefits that are hard to fire and that sometimes don't do what they're told, or sometimes inform their leaders that what they're asking for is unconstitutional or goes against existing policy or rules. These agencies, even though they're pretty harmless, and even in terms of the Trump administration, generally speaking, those public officials are the weakest and have the least ability to do pushback. But that's where everyone on the right agrees that you can cut them down to nothing and it would benefit the Republican coalition. So the what Heritage has done in Project 2025 is taken this the lessons learned from the first Trump administration and a very keen awareness of the limitations of Donald Trump as a political leader. They know that he's not going to do the reading himself. They know that he's not going to come up with a plan himself. They know that he's not going to do organization building himself. And they took that on to produce a roadmap that would allow Trump to do all of the crazy stuff that he's promising to do this time, unlike the previous time. People have focused most narrowly on the programmatic component, where Heritage lays out its policy proposals. But that's actually just one element of the overall project and probably the least important. Some of those policies are crazy, typical Republican conservative overreach. They're flirting with the idea of banning not just same-sex marriage, but divorce. They argue for and against, but largely for a nationwide abortion ban, things like that. But there's also, let's abolish public sector unions. Let's do more private education through voucherization. We got to drill for more fossil fuels, et cetera, standard Republican stuff. That gets a lot of attention, but it's the least significant element, in my opinion. There's an additional component, which is a comprehensive description of the laws and rules governing the operation of state agencies. Who is responsible for actually doing things at, say, the Department of Transportation? Who is responsible for hiring and firing people, determining promotions at the Department of State? How does the military hierarchy work, and how do new generals get appointed? The Project 2025 breaks down these questions and gives you very specific answers in terms of the regulations you can invoke to assert presidential authority over elements of the federal civil service, the powers that you could use to dismiss officials, even those that have union or statutory protection, and the key positions that need to be staffed with loyalists if you're going to be able to get a controversial program pushed down to the enforcement implementation level. And then it has a Rolodex of willing loyalists who are pre-screened for ideological conviction, who have already been trained up on some of what they'll need to know to take over these positions and um, do what Trump has promised. An entire, from the perspective of, to draw a leftist analogy, imagine if Lenin shows up at Finland Station and right away he's handed a list with 200,000 qualified cadres for the Communist Party and a detailed plan on all of the choke points and weaknesses of the Imperial Army, right? These are the officers you have to wipe out, and these are the ones you want to replace them. It would massively enable the seizure of power and the implementation of a radical agenda in the Russian Empire. And similarly, this program would, the scariest part about it is on the administrative side, on the organizational side. Forget the policy, but all of the practical workplace stuff, it'll work. It's a perfectly, they're right. They've done the homework, and as a result, they know how to purge the officials in, whether it's DHS or state or the Department of Justice, that they don't want to keep, they don't trust. And they have a deep bench. They're not going to have to go to Scaramucci or something, or rely on people that, Reince Priebus has shortlisted, but they have MAGA loyalists, a very, very deep bench that are happy to show up, and that, rather than looking for excuses not to do the Trump agenda, will do everything in their power to make President Trump happy and to do things like deport 10 million immigrants, do things like find novel ways to crack down on protesters.
It's
And
it's fun.
that's the scary part.
It's